For centuries, Carthage was a titan of the ancient world. It was a superpower whose wealth was legendary and whose navies commanded the Mediterranean. They were Rome's great rival, and for a time, they inflicted devastating losses on the renowned republic. So how did this mighty empire just vanish in a cloud of fire and mystery? How were its people slaughtered or enslaved, and its very name almost erased from history? Let's uncover the complex web of political backstabbing, economic ruin, and military blunders that led to the shocking downfall of Carthage. The rival superpowers. Before its fiery end, Carthage was the envy of the Mediterranean. From its strategic port in modern-day Tunisia, it sat at the heart of a sprawling maritime and commercial empire. Its power stretched across North Africa, into Spain, and over the crucial islands of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. Carthaginian merchants were masters of the sea, their ships heavy with the riches of the known world metals from Spain, timber from the Atlas Mountains, and grain from the fertile plains of North Africa. Their harbors were marvels of engineering, their markets buzzed with a dozen languages, and their wealth was the stuff of legend. For a long time, they were the undisputed kings of Western Mediterranean trade. Carthage was a republic, but it was ruled by a powerful oligarchy of rich merchant families. Its government was led by two annually elected magistrates called sophites, who answered to a senate of elders. Now, unlike Rome, where political and military leadership were often the same thing, Carthage usually appointed generals for specific campaigns. This gave them immense power in the field, but kept them on a short political leash at home. This separation of powers, which even thinkers like Aristotle praised, would eventually become a critical weakness. The city's strength was its navy and its treasury, but its armies were a double-edged sword. They were vast, multicultural forces made up mostly of mercenaries, whose loyalty was only as strong as Carthage's ability to pay them. This was not only a constant financial drain, but a source of deep instability. Meanwhile, on the other side of the sea, a different kind of power was rising. Rome wasn't a naval empire built on trade. It was a land-based power built on conquest and assimilation. Its strength lay in its legions-disciplined armies of citizen soldiers fighting for their own land and the promise of more. Rome was a machine of relentless expansion, swallowing the Italian peninsula piece by piece. Where Carthage saw trade routes and partners, Rome saw strategic threats and future provinces. The two superpowers were on a collision course. For a while, treaties kept a fragile peace, drawing lines in the sand. Rome was to stay out of Sicily, and Carthage was to stay out of Italy. But as Rome locked down its control over the peninsula, its gaze inevitably turned south toward the rich, contested island of Sicily. The island was a mosaic of Greek city-states and Carthaginian outposts, a powder keg just waiting for a spark. That spark came in 264 BC. A squabble between mercenaries in the Sicilian city of Messana gave both sides an excuse. One group appealed to Carthage, the other to Rome. Rome, seeing a chance to get a foothold on the island and check Carthaginian power, crossed the strait. Carthage couldn't let its great rival dominate an island so vital to its trade, so it responded in force. The First Punic War had begun. It was a conflict neither side really wanted right then, but one both knew was coming. The long, brutal struggle for the Mediterranean was underway, a rivalry that would last over a century and end in one of the most complete destructions in all of ancient history. The Punic Wars. The First Punic War was a grueling 23-year meat grinder that changed both empires forever. It was mostly a naval conflict, a world where Carthage had always been the master. But the Romans proved to be terrifyingly adaptable. They weren't natural sailors, but they were fast learners. They captured a Carthaginian warship, reverse-engineered it, and started mass-producing their own fleet. More importantly, they innovated. They invented the corvus, a large, spiked boarding bridge that could be dropped onto an enemy ship. This brilliant device allowed their superior soldiers, to turn a sea battle into a land battle. Carthage, for its part, completely underestimated Roman resolve. They were used to wars fought by mercenaries for limited goals. They couldn't grasp Rome's willingness to absorb staggering losses of ships and men, only to come back even stronger. After 2 decades of brutal fighting, and with its treasury stretched thin, Carthage suffered a decisive naval defeat off the Aegates Islands in 241 BC. Humbled, Carthage asked for peace. The terms were harsh. They had to give up Sicily entirely and pay a massive indemnity to Rome, a sum designed to cripple their economy. The defeat left Carthage in chaos. Unable to pay its mercenaries, the state faced a vicious revolt that tore through its North African lands for 3 years. And while Carthage was distracted, Rome, in a blatant breach of the peace treaty, seized the islands of Sardinia and Corsica, tightening its chokehold on the Mediterranean. This cynical power grab was never forgotten in Carthage. It fed a deep, burning hatred for Rome, a desire for revenge that would soon be embodied by one man, Hannibal Barca. Born during the First War, Hannibal was the son of Hamilcar Barca, a brilliant Carthaginian general. Legend says Hamilcar made his young son swear a sacred oath at an altar to be an enemy of Rome for all time. After Hamilcar died building a new Carthaginian empire in Spain, and his successor was assassinated, the army unanimously proclaimed the 26-year-old Hannibal their commander in 221 BC. Hannibal was a military genius. He was a master of strategy who could read both the terrain and the minds of his opponents. He spent years consolidating Carthaginian power in Spain, but his eyes were always fixed on Italy. The flashpoint for the Second War came in 218 BC, when Hannibal attacked and conquered Saguntum, a Roman ally. When Rome demanded that Carthage hand him over, the Carthaginian Senate refused. The Second Punic War was on. What happened next was one of the most audacious military campaigns in history. Knowing he couldn't challenge Rome's powerful navy, Hannibal decided to take the war to Rome's doorstep by land. He marched his army of force of North Africans, Spaniards, and Gauls, famously joined by war elephants out of Spain, across the Pyrenees, through southern Gaul, and then, most incredibly, over the treacherous, snow-capped Alps and into Italy. The journey was brutal. He lost thousands of men and most of his elephants to the harsh weather and hostile tribes. But the army that stumbled into the plains of northern Italy was a hardened, veteran force fanatically loyal to its commander. Over the next 2 years, Hannibal inflicted one humiliating defeat after another on the Romans. At the battles of Trebia and Lake Trasimene, he used brilliant tactics of ambush and envelopment to completely destroy entire Roman armies. Panic gripped the city of Rome. Their invincible legions seemed to just melt away before this Carthaginian phantom. And this is where the story gets complicated. Hannibal was winning, but he wasn't getting the support he needed. Why? The answer lies in the messy, toxic politics of Carthage itself. A government was split by bitter rivalries, mainly between a powerful landowning aristocracy led by a man named Hanno the Great and the pro-expansion merchant party of Hannibal's family, the Barcids. Hanno and his allies were deeply suspicious of Hannibal's war. They were the old money, more concerned with protecting their farms in North Africa than funding a risky, open-ended war of vengeance in Italy. They argued in the Senate that Hannibal's quest was for personal glory, not a state necessity. This political backstabbing was devastating. While Hannibal begged for more men and money to press his advantage, his requests were endlessly debated, delayed, or just flat-out denied by his own government. The reinforcements that might have let him march on Rome were often sent to less important fronts like Spain, or never sent at all. He was being asked to win a war for an empire that refused to fully back him. In 216 BC, Hannibal achieved his masterpiece at the Battle of Cannae. Facing the largest Roman army ever assembled, he pulled off a perfect double envelopment, sucking the Roman legions into the center of his line before his flanks closed around them like a trap. It was a tactical masterclass, and one of the bloodiest days in Roman history. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers were killed. The defeat sent a shockwave across the Mediterranean. Rome was on its knees, paralyzed with fear. This was the moment. If Carthage had sent a full-strength relief army and siege weapons, history could have turned out very differently. But they didn't. Hannibal, lacking the resources to attack the heavily fortified city of Rome, was forced to spend the next decade trying to peel away Rome's allies, fighting a war of attrition he couldn't possibly win. While Hannibal was trapped in Italy, Rome, showing its incredible resilience, did something brilliant. Instead of just throwing more armies at Hannibal, they changed the game. A young, charismatic general named Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, came onto the scene. Scipio had studied Hannibal's tactics and learned from Rome's defeats. After driving the Carthaginians out of Spain, he convinced the Roman Senate to approve a daring plan: invade North Africa and threaten Carthage directly. The gamble worked. The Carthaginian government, panicked at the sight of Roman legions on their home turf, recalled their greatest general to defend the city. In 203 BC, Hannibal left Italy, not as a conqueror, but as a defender. The final showdown came in 202 BC on the plains of Zama. It was a battle of giants, but this time, Scipio had the upper hand, especially with his cavalry. He used Hannibal's own tactics against him, creating lanes in his formation to absorb the charge of the war elephants, and then using his superior cavalry to surround and crush Hannibal's army. Hannibal was defeated. The Second Punic War was over. The destruction, the peace treaty Rome imposed in 201 BC, was designed to be utterly ruinous. Carthage was stripped of all its overseas territories, including the rich silver mines of Spain. Its navy was cut down to just 10 ships, and most devastatingly, it was forced to pay a crippling indemnity of 10,000 silver talents over 50 years, a sum meant to permanently break its economic power. But the most critical clause was this: Carthage was forbidden from waging war, even to defend itself, without Roman permission. This effectively made Carthage a helpless client state. In the aftermath, Hannibal, the great general, proved he was also a skilled statesman. Elected as a chief magistrate, he launched sweeping reforms to stabilize the state and pay the war debt. He cracked down on the very corrupt oligarchs who had undermined his war effort, making the government more efficient and fair. His success was remarkable. In fact, Carthage's economy recovered so quickly that Hannibal offered to pay off the entire remaining war debt to Rome in a single payment, decades early. Ironically, this success is what sealed Carthage's fate. Rome didn't want a stable, prosperous Carthage. It wanted a broken one. Alarmed by the offer and pressured by Hannibal's political enemies in Carthage, Rome demanded that Carthage surrender its greatest hero. To save his city from another war, Hannibal fled into exile. He spent the rest of his life advising foreign kings in their fights against Rome, until he finally took his own life to avoid being captured. Even with Hannibal gone, Carthage's economic revival continued to unnerve many in Rome. The fear of a resurgent rival became a political obsession, championed by the influential senator, Cato the Elder. After seeing Carthage's renewed prosperity on a diplomatic visit, Cato became convinced that Rome would never be safe as long as Carthage existed. He began to end every speech he gave in the Senate, no matter the topic, with the same chilling phrase: Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. The excuse for this destruction was provided by Rome's own ally, the Numidian king Massinissa. Emboldened by the treaty that left Carthage defenseless, Massinissa repeatedly raided and seized Carthaginian territory for decades. Each time, Carthage appealed to Rome to step in, and each time, Rome sided with its ally, allowing Carthaginian lands to be chipped away. By 151 BC, Carthage had finally paid off its 50-year war indemnity. Believing the treaty was now fulfilled, and pushed to the breaking point by yet another Numidian attack, Carthage raised an army to defend itself. This was the moment Rome had been waiting for. Even though the Carthaginian army was promptly defeated by the Numidians, Rome declared that Carthage had violated the treaty. It was a flimsy, cynical excuse for a war of annihilation. In 149 BC, a massive Roman army landed in North Africa. Panicked, Carthage offered unconditional surrender. The Roman consuls demanded 300 children of the nobility as hostages, and then demanded that the Carthaginians surrender all of their weapons and armor. They complied, sending hundreds of thousands of sets of armor and thousands of catapults to the Roman camp, leaving their city completely defenseless. Only then did Rome deliver its final, horrific ultimatum. The city of Carthage itself had to be abandoned. Its people had to move at least 10 miles inland, away from the sea that was their lifeblood. It was a death sentence for their entire civilization. Realizing they'd been tricked, and that their choice was between extinction or fighting to the last, the Carthaginians chose to fight. The city gates were slammed shut. The Third Punic War began. But it wasn't a war, it was a siege. What followed was a 3-year testament to human desperation. The people of Carthage worked feverishly to rearm their city. Temples became workshops, with citizens forging new swords and shields day and night. In a famous act of defiance, the women of Carthage cut off their own hair to be braided into ropes for new catapults. Every home became a fortress. The Romans, who had expected a quick victory, were stunned by the fierce resistance. Their first assaults were beaten back. Finally, in 147 BC, command was given to Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus. He was a ruthless and effective commander who tightened the siege, building a massive wall to block the harbor and cut off all supplies from the sea. Slowly, methodically, the Romans squeezed the life out of the city. Starvation and disease took their toll. In the spring of 146 BC, Scipio launched the final assault. Roman legions breached the walls and poured in. The fight turned into a week-long, house-to-house slaughter. The Romans had to take the city one block at a time, fighting through narrow streets against a people who knew they were doomed. They showed no mercy, killing men, women, and children. After 6 days of unimaginable carnage, the last 50,000 survivors, a fraction of the city's original population, surrendered. They were all sold into slavery. For days, the city was systematically looted and then burned to the ground. The story that the Romans sowed the fields with salt is likely a later invention, but it captures the sheer totality of the destruction they intended. Carthage wasn't just defeated, it was erased. This channel is dedicated to unraveling the epic stories of the past. If you want to see more documentaries that explore the rise and fall of great civilizations, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if there's a topic you're passionate about, let us know in the comments below. We also have a Patreon where you can get early access to videos and help us create more content just like this. What truly caused the collapse of Carthage? It wasn't one single event, but a slow, painful process. It was a political system paralyzed by infighting, where the selfish interests of an oligarchy could sabotage the nation's greatest general. It was an economy bled dry by decades of constant warfare and crushing reparations that, in turn, funded Rome's own rise. It was a military that, despite moments of sheer genius, was ultimately exhausted and outmaneuvered. But more than anything, the fall of Carthage was caused by Rome. It was caused by a rival that was more unified, more adaptable, and had an almost pathological drive to dominate. In the end, Rome didn't destroy Carthage because it was a threat by 146 BC. It really wasn't. Rome destroyed Carthage because it could. It was a calculated act of political and economic annihilation, meant to eliminate a rival for good and send a terrifying message to the rest of the world. The collapse of Carthage left a void in the historical record. With its libraries burned and its people scattered, most of what we know about this great civilization comes to us through the biased lens of its conquerors. Its fall marked a pivotal moment in history, leaving Rome as the uncontested superpower of the Mediterranean and setting it on the path to empire. We're left to wonder about the world that might have been. What if Carthage, with its mercantile genius and multicultural society, had won? What different path might history have taken? The ashes of Carthage hold no answers, only a deep and silent mystery.